Hello and welcome back again to our class. This is our 12th meetings and uh, we are going to talk even in depth about our topics that we have finished it on 2 and 3 meetings where we focus on the methods for no code development methods, and we have also talk about the general knowledge when it comes to no code game programming or no code game development, where we are trying to figure out or making an idea into a practice in the implementation of creativity and innovation as well. And today we are going to focus more on the game development, but in this case, one of the good idea that we can use and to focus on if we are going to use our information technology in this certain creativity and innovative ways of use for the information technology. Today we are going to discuss about the no code mobile game programming that focus on how these outputs as game are being used mobilely, especially in this case on how it could be played in a handheld devices. So let's get started. We will start with the mobile game programming definition and how it is structured and used, or even the historical behind it. It will become a question as well when we are going to go through this discussion of a question of how to create a game application without coding. So the definition of mobile game application is it is a game digital games that could be played mobilely using handheld devices, not only smartphone but also an inclusive game handheld such as what we know now is Nintendo Wii, or the one that not really popular, which is PS Vita, the latest one. And also there are a lot of handheld uh, technology that we can use for that. For your information, that this kind of game application was created a long time ago, and it's used to be code and built manually using written codes, and there was a really long and complicated process that they do, and making this kind of things to move on the screen, to do animation and to do complicated action in your graphics, in your monitor or on your TV, need a lot of manually inputted features, and it usually been made using text inputs only, and this thing is not really easy to do, even though that they are experienced programmer, the one who usually develop the games. It won't be an easy task. That's why a long time ago when they are going to develop a game, it takes too much time, even only for one parts of the game to be finished. And that's why usually in gaming community there has been an uproar and on angry and impatience by the community to wait for their favorite games to be continued and be developed develop into a new games. Then that's why there comes a lot of solution. So these days there are a lot of solution where things change, where probably in the game development itself, where the game developers usually uh, can do game development with little coding knowledge, and even though that they do that, they doesn't really need to code at all. Then it would become one of the innovation that we know today. But uh, there are also an example of how it is also become one of the major problem, because nowadays there are a lot of application that we can use for that, the software that help them create games without any code or requiring programming skills. So that's why it's not only important to have knowledge to use the software, but also to analyze and to compare what is the best use of the technology, the software in our needs. And for these topics, we are going to focus on the mobile games development. So that's why it is important for us to know this kind of things and do it in our own way. Now let's take a look a little bit of a question that may arise when we are talking about the game development. Does game development requires code, any programming skills? And the answer is quite simple. It isn't a necessity. It does not need to be able to have coding in this information technologies that we have today. In fact, in the presence of a lot of game engines such as Unity or Game Maker Studios, the game developers could be able to create entire games without single line of code. But there will also be a problem if even though that there's a simple solution like this, and they think that it would be easy and it would make them eager to develop a game without development at all, even though that some of the game developer would be able to do that. The output of their games creation wouldn't be in a good quality. So that's why we also need to make sure that this is not only become one of the uh, things that we need to be aware of, but also become one of the preparation that we use as a part of what we keep in mind. But as long as the game developer is serious and want to look at the game development itself by only using this kind of game engines, they would be able to give an high quality output in terms of games, even though that not only the game development, they also need to be focused on the business skills, because this would also become a crucial part of the game development. Because even though that uh, we can create the games, as I mentioned before, it wouldn't be a sustainable activities that you do unless that this kind of things you do only for the sake of your hobbies or uh, your what you're interested in, and you doesn't really care of the benefits or the profits in this game development. It's gonna be a good one. But some of the people that really focus on these kind of things, they decide it to become their career. So that's why in order to pursue this in the future, you will also need to have substantial programming skills. But we can start a bit by bit, a little by a little, from the fundamentals into the advanced level, while we are studying and making our mobile games in this case. So having a coding knowledge, programming skill as well, is what we will also need in the later phase. So this kind of skills will help us as a game developer on knowing what happens in the game development process, even though that we don't do the coding at all. It will give us some solution, some idea about the next phase on our game development. It will also make us to be easier to comprehend and edit the assets in our game developments, because in game developments we need to be able to do that, because coding would be more accurate than drag and drop, and it will give us better control over the game that we are supposed to develop, and it will answer uh, that question about, does game development requires coding, and still come back to the same answer. It really isn't a necessity, but in order to pursue the game developments in the futures, we will be able to have a chance to learn about the coding knowledge and hopefully become a full-time programmer, in this case a game programmer. Into the next question. So the next question is how difficult it is to program a game. So one thing that we have to know about game development is one of the most difficult types of programming, because it doesn't only focus on the calculation and the setup of its database, but it requires the developer to do a lot of things, from planning and also designing graphics, and the core of the coding, or in this case if we are going with no code development, is the drag and drop. But it is still the process of coding, but much simpler, and also a lot of activities that requires we as a team of game developers to be able to focus, even though that we choose the path not to be a game developer, a studios or group, but more in the individual game developers. It will require even more uh, difficult and complicated things to achieve, not to mention the skills base that we need to have, the amount of work times that it would be needed to get that, and all of it would become one of your daily jobs as a game developers. So all of these game development phases would demand a lot of dedication and hard work as well. That's why it would not be one of the example that should be done in a hard half hard kind of work, because game development is one of those fields that people could take only if they sincerely love what they are doing. Creating a single game is one thing, but it will take them hours to master the craft until they can build everything that their mind can imagine. And that's why most of the time the game developers are the one who love to play games, and they came from the background of gamers, and they try to pursue it to make their own ideal games, even though that some of their dreams doesn't came true because the limited function of game engines that doesn't able to comprehend the dreams and imagination of our own games that we wanted to fulfill. So to answer the question is, how difficult is it to program a game? The answer is quite simple. It depends on how much love, how much passion that you have in this game development. And the higher the passion and the love that you want to do in game developments, the easier the difficulty that it requires into making this kind of game development activities. Because when you do what you love, it would be a simple task, but it would be hard task for others to see that if that is not their passion. So it's also should come in your minds when you're trying to plan into becoming a game developers, because without that kind of passion that you do, you will be retired in a short amount of times, not to include a lot of obstacles that you it may be arise. But hopefully by doing this game development, even though that there will be obstacles and problems, we should be able to thank you the newest development of the technology, the internet, because we can elaborate using the internet. Sometimes the solution of our obstacles in game development and also uh, the problems, we can find the solution through the internet. The community is so much big, so big that they can help you solve the problem even before you ask a question. It is hardly a hard case that we doesn't find our solution that hasn't been answered by the community. So that's why, even though that it would look difficult at first, but in the running development, it would be something that impossible to become an obstacle, since almost all the solution, even though that some of the solution won't be fine in the same day, but in the future there will be a solution for that. So it will just be a focus on what we love to do, and it would be an easy task to do at game developments. Now let's move into the topics of how to make mobile app games, how it could be uh, become one of the advantages as us learn how to develop a game. The general process of how we make this mobile game app so it could be played on our smartphones. If even though that our smartphone is quite different, we use maybe iOS or Android, or even there has been some customized operating system that used by some other mobile phones such as Huawei and other kind of operating system that may not be popular but still be used. That's up to us as a game developer whether we want to develop the game for that kind of operating system, even though that it won't be a big investment if you think economically, but uh, for the sake of the passion as well, why not? Now the process would start with an idea. An idea like this should be developed and manifest by itself by uh, why what I described earlier usually comes when we play games, because the basic one is we need to be able to play game first before we create our own games. In a sense of the game development, we need to be able to introduce ourselves to what we think that we like, and move from that we will able to share to the community, even though that sometimes our own idea won't really look good on the others, but that would be a different case. But also this will become one of the struggles that we can come in the future as well. That's why it is important that our own idea to develop a game should be able to gather the needs of the community. For this community, for the example of this topic, the community is the gamers itself. So it's good to take an idea. Even for example in social media like TikTok, when the game developers showcase their games, they take feedbacks from their followers, the visitor of that page, and even though they made some bargain to them when it uh, for example when it hit certain limits, they try to give them a reward, such as making the name of their character of the games into the name of their followers or donators. And we can gather also investor, even though that we can say the investor is a small time investor, they will just invest maybe $5, $10, but it would help as well even before the start or the finish of our game product. So every step of making things, the first thing that developer needs is to develop an idea that also could give a solution for their financial budget. We need to ask ourselves also what the mobile games are going to be, whether it is going to be a gacha games that could be able to provide profit for us. But if you wanted only to give or showcase and make your own mobile games, you can maybe make an RPG and put it for free at the stores, or maybe a fantasy games that you wanted to. But if you also wanted to make a games that are giving you profits using RPG, you can put it for sale. As it doesn't really limited to how much you want to charge for your games, but sometimes we need to be able to know the market price of our games. For example, most of the successful games like Angry Birds, Flappy Bird, and Temple Run have numbers to boast because of their ideas, and it comes with what we said originality. No, on even a rare site of this kind of game has popped up, and also there are variable of luck and changes, because when we put it at stores, the algorithms of that store, such as Google Play, um, Apple Store, etc., the algorithm works in different ways. Sometimes they randomize promotion, or sometimes the system was promoted by the owner of the Play Store, the store, the App Store itself. So it would be sometimes a matter of promotion about this kind of game as well. That's why it's also important for us to make a marketing strategy if we are going to focus our game development with profits uh, and money oriented businesses, because we need to able to promote using promotion in social media, and sometimes and almost all of the time it would be uh, cost to our budget. We also need to think out of the box, because everything would change in one way or another in the trends or the markets of the interaction in social media. We need also to focus and know the people's conventional views about games, because even though that there are people who love games, there are community, there are also unofficial community that says that game is bad because there are so many hawks around, and even from the gamers community itself make the debate, the topics about game become more and more a conflict like war zone, when they are trying to say, oh, game is not bad, is not a good thing to do, ban games, it makes people stupid or it makes people become lazy, etc, etc. And it would also affect us as game developer. That's why we also need to plan mitigation. We have to make them understand as well, and even if there are some problem with the time consuming uh, for a certain people, some of the game developer even have an idea to limit the game time of their game, so they limit maybe 1 or 2 hours maximum per day to play the games, and they will lose stamina. There has been some case of that. If we want to have a mitigation action to uh, decrease this kind of debates between the people who try to say that game is bad for you. The next one is how to decide, because in a more common sense, game is divided into two major types. In this term is the dimension of it. We have two-dimensional games and three-dimensional games. For a rare case, there are also uh, different dimension that we could also include, such as 4D, 5D, etc. But sometimes it's just promotional as uh, the advantages of those game. But uh, what we see, it's actually only can be viewed in 3 dimension. So it's more as a marketing term, and we decided it into two more common types in game development. So what would we choose, two-dimensional or three-dimensional? So the idea is to make the games look and feels right, though it doesn't mean that 3D is better than 2D. It's not always the right decision. It's not always the right decision to choose 3D over 2D because you wanted to make your games look cooler and make it look like futuristic, because in some case creating 3D games also uh, making sure that you need more resources and powerful systems to able to render, to code, and even not all of the gamers have the infrastructure, the technology to able to play our games if we are going to decide with 3D. And even in the types of game genres, not all of the game genres are suitable with 3D. Some of them uh, is good when it is in two-dimensional type of games. We have some cases also in 3D games may seem unnecessary in some cases. For example, the Flappy Bird. No matter how many studios have copied the game and developed those games, even make it the 3D, the original 2D version has always been the best and have given us some kind of nostalgic feelings on that. Next one is the process to choose our platform. So there are a lot of game engine platform that we can choose from, and it is the same that we discussed earlier within the common general game engine development. What we need to be able to focus on is what is the game nativity in that environment. Is it good enough for an RPG game to be natively only use two-dimensional games, or is it would be a good idea as well if we try to increase its capacity in three-dimensional types of game? Or we can also try to ask and analyze how could they go if it is imported or port to another platform or even web applications. Is 3D is good enough to be imported to other operating system, or do we have the capability in our game engines to do that or not? So that's why it would be an important question. For also, for one example, what we call a native app is one that has been created explicitly for one operating system, and it's the common case and the term of the native app. But in other hand, a cross-platform game can run on more than one operating system, and that's what the technology in game engines that we usually have now. And a web-based application can directly run on web browsers, which become limited in this case, because even though that they wanted to give the powerful feeling of integration and can be used anywhere, this kind of web browser games is limited because of the technology that they use. It needs to be run on browser. Even some of the application of game engine making sure that it is a web browser but inside of application, it's still not a best practice to be used in game development. We will discuss more about cross-platform in our last meetings next week, but today let's focus more on the game development itself. So one thing that we also need to know and understand when we are going to choose a platform, it should be one of what we choose as one of our life life leap, or when we choose something that is important to us. That's why choosing a platform would means that you will wanted to make a long life commitment on using that platform, because not to mention that we will have some costs when we are using that platform. It will also become one of our best experience that we have. Even though that in some cases that we need to choose to move on between platform, because one is too out to date or one is too difficult or doesn't support a new technology at all. This is would be one of our commitment as well, because it would take too much time to learn everything at the starting point. Even though that in some cases, such as when we are learning programming language, it would help us, but still it will take what we call a learning curve, and we will start from the bottom until at the certain point of time we will able to master it at some degree. Not fully master it, even some of the knowledge that we have would simply be forgotten in a certain point of time if it is not being used at the same time. So it is unwise for us if we are going to uh, learn a lot of programming language, learn different game engines or platform, simply to not use them at all, because it will decrease their your skill in game development. So that's why it is important to have this long life commitment, almost the same as marriage, but this is more on a professional ways, or uh, your hobbies, if you are into game development as one of your hobbies. Next, is the process of making the game in this term code. The game has, as I mentioned and we discussed earlier about the recommendation to start from the beginning using Java programming. Learn because Java is the baseline of most game programmers because of its simplicity, dynamically language that could be used for other applications as well. That's why it is important to give this in mind also because when we are going with no code programming, the next point on the future, we still going to learn how to code, or even though that understand a little bit doesn't really require you to remember all of the programming skills that is needed, for example in Java. But we need to keep in mind when we as a game developer need to choose Java for games. It is a good thing that we use that as our training session to increase our experience because Java is one of the similar one. In other terms, C++, which give better control of the hardware. It would be easy if we do it separately, or would be better if we learn them side by side. For example, as well, games like Star Wars Galaxy and Runescape were created in Java, while game like Counter-Strike, if you know, and Football Pro use C++. So it's really kind of things to choose from, and a long life commitment as well if you are going to learn. So as programmer as well would learn programming language like Java and C++, they will find it simpler to learn other languages. So it is what we need to keep in mind. That's why I have to tell you again and again. We also have what we say the JavaScript that we can use in game programming. Even the game engine will give it automatically using drag and drop kind of situation. It is more a straightforward language to learn and to choose, and even programmers can use it alongside HTML and CSS. They can create the best web-based games that we usually see in the market. And for your information, the game Angry Birds, which was the popular games back back in the years, it was based only by JavaScript, and we hopefully still remember if you were into playing games. You know how frustrating that was. Even the developer has been given a death threats because of how the game was so difficult. Yeah, but so it doesn't really matter on how complex your games is, but how you can create the games that could potentially become a good one. But hopefully it wasn't going to be a good and bad, such as the uh, Flappy Bird. So that is the process that we have to move and do in the game development. Now let's take a look and review some of the coding languages for mobile game development. Even though that we focus on the no code coding because it will be used only by drag and drop, but we also need to know the fundamentals of the drag and drop itself because it's translate into the programming language, and that's why it is important because sooner or later when we focus on game development you will have to learn this as well. So we need to know that coding provides the basis of the environment and technological system, and in this case for the game development, and it will also affect in the term of our gaming community. So that's why it is important to know and hopefully be prepared for the better or the worst in the game development activities. The first one, we have the Kotlin coding language. So Kotlin is uh, easy adoption for Java programmers because Kotlin run on the Java machines, and Java interoperability has been one of its main objective because this is what is the programming language that it focus on. It runs everywhere Java operates. So whether it is used as web servers, on mobile devices such as Androids, and even in desktop applications. So it will also work with all the major tools in Java ecosystem like Eclipse, IntelliJ, Maven, and Gradle, Spring Boot, etc. If you remember some of it, or even if you doesn't know, it would be fine because based on your progression in game development, you will hear this kind of things more frequently and understand of how it is a tools that uh, are made as software development kits, or what we know today as SDKs. But we are not going to focus on that. We will focus more on the programming language itself. So this Kotlin is also makes an adoption extremely easy even for existing Java projects. So it supports on exporting your Java projects into the Kotlin itself, and on top of that, you can ensure the type safety and less boilerplate codes needed. So it doesn't really making a long lines of codes, but a simple one that help people on achieving the programming that they wanted to do. So this one is able to be happen in Kotlin because Kotlin was made with JetBrains, where it was the developers of IntelliJ idea. So it stands to reason that the IntelliJ support for Kotlin is also great because aside of that, Kotlin will also work with existing Java tools like, as I mentioned earlier, we have the Eclipse, Maven, Gradle, even the famous, the native studio for Android, which is the Android Studio. And there is a lot more of tools or software development kits that we can choose from, even what you haven't heard for. The next one we have what we talked about earlier, the JavaScript, because the powerful programming language that we can use it to run both on browser and even on server. It was introduced as a solution using what we call Node.js, and because of Node.js, it is now possible to run JavaScript as web server, and it would do things like it would allow the developers, the programmers, to create server-based application sooner than would if they had learned a separate programming language, because they will also learn about the server-side coding, because using JavaScript, it's not only a programming language that's supported by web browsers, it puts it in the unique situation of being the only programming language that is available on both the client side and server side. But it also comes with the downside and the disadvantages of how to read this kind of code, because if you're not familiar with it, it will be so confusing to read. The next one we have C as well, and this one is more clean and simple syntax suitable for beginners, as we discussed earlier. We know also that the Lua syntax is modeled from what we call Modula, a language known for being a fantastic introduction to programming. This Lua's performance compares very well to other languages as well, because its performance can be improved by the programmers, where they can implement critical parts in C and use the what they call Lua GIT compiler to able to focus and give an outputs of the programs they want, in this case the game that we wanted to be played on. So it's also have a growing size in popularity because Lua has a rather large and helpful community surrounding it, and even though that it is more and more and becoming more and more popular, it has some problem where it really easy to make mistakes when declaring variables, because if you haven't noticed in programming, we will have to work on variables, which is the part of the basic mathematics method that we have to master first. So that's why even though that we are going with programming, as I mentioned in the previous meetings, that we also need to learn the basic of math that focus on the computing or computer science. We also have C++ using the ISO and ICC GTC1 as its developer. So this C++ is large known in larger community as well, and following uh, also what we mentioned earlier, it has the libraries for every kind of task that is possible to do with C++, because C++ and its parents or precursors C are lower level than a lot of popular programming languages, but they are also faster at executing code than Java or other programming languages, because it will require virtual machines and garbage collection threads, where it is a function that usually used to maximize the processing time in computer. So the bigger the threads, the fastest it is to process the programming language. But this language, however, has the disadvantages of what they call undefined behavior, in which it will cause subtle errors that can render all program undefined by the complicated of the programming language itself as its standard. But the standards impose no requirements in such case. So C++ compiler will writers are free to ignore this kind of undefined error existence of such case, and uh, in when they do that, it will make a problem in the future where it happen instead. And this still a big problem that even expert can avoid, and it has become a common case in this programming language. As we discussed about the coding language that we can use, now let's move on the example of game engines that we can use, because uh, as the proverb in Indonesian, or what Indonesian says, tak kenal maka tak sayang, or in English, when you don't know the people, you won't love them. That's why we need to introduce at least the basic and fundamentals, even though that we are going to uh, introduce or know only and choose only one game engines. It should be one of the prioritized as well if we have to analyze and compare for its fellow following competitors as well. So the first one, before the example, we also need to answer the question of how to make a game without coding, because this is our own main topics to know. So if a developer want to make a game without coding, they need to install a game engine that also allows them to design and create game elements with drag and drop or with point and click, as we discussed in previous meetings. So this kind of process are done instead of having to write codes, or they can work with what we call graphical elements on their screen. And this is what we do to make the game without the coding, even though that the end result may not be a triple A game or a high quality games like PUBG or GTA San Andreas, if you knew. But that is uh, the best that developer have without using actual codes. That's why I said earlier, this kind of thing is limited if you want to be a famous or the best game developer it is to come. So even though even so, it still could able to create a popular game if the idea of using this kind of no code game development is popular. So that's what we need to understand. We need to understand on before we start with this game development without the use of code, or what we call the no code game development. So the first one is an application called, a game engine called Quick App Ninja. It is an app builder with templates that allow users to create their own focus in quiz games. It can also be used to make profits using the ads that's shown in their games. They also doesn't need a special skills or coding knowledge to use this kind of things, because the build game, the drag and drop is really easy, and it has what it's called wizard, so automatic procedure to finish the games into what it wanted to be used. The next one, we have also what we discussed in the previous meeting, the Game Maker Studio, because it's not only focused on the low code game development, but it could also be used for no code gaming development as well, because their slogan is making games is for everyone, and it has its version, which is the Game Maker 2 Studio. It lets people of all backgrounds and expertise level build excellent and playable games as well, and they have rightfully claimed it on their official website. It is possible to make development process simple, and you can make it a better one. And the powerful advantages of this platform is mostly on its interfaces, which almost the same with the others, where it was the drag and drop, and also the built-in scripting language that we need to learn, and it's quite different. For me, it is a disadvantages because it's not really the coding language that we learn, but more exclusively for that Game Maker Studio. They also have the advantages of a lot of essential tutorials that can lead you into building your own games, and you can start doing it as soon as you access it. And usually this Game Maker Studio could be accessed using the Steam store, where it was created at Valve. If you're hardcore gamers, you might have heard or even become one of the frequent user of Steam. The next one is the Game Salad. We also talked this earlier before, because it's not only having outputs, just the rest of them that they focus on an output in PC application or PC games, but they can also give an output in mobile, such as Android, such as iOS, and it is quite easier to use. But the simple feature is almost identically the same, but they have been creating or produce a high quality games, individual games that also is quite popular, if I may say. They have the logic of if this then that logic, that you can also use to create an even more better game with higher functionality. We do have also Unity, and it is can be focused on gay mobile games as well. One of the famous mobile games in Indonesia is Mobile Legends. It was developed in Unity, but it's not on no code game development, so it's highly focused on the programming side of the game development. Hopefully by learning this kind of things and focus on game development, you can create those kind of game as well. We also have to know that RPG Maker or RPG Creator, it is also the game creation that can focus on making mobile games development, whether it is iOS or Android, and it could be used as one of solution or alternative if we are going with role-playing games genre. So this is also almost the same with the RPG Maker, and it's basically the same thing that they can use. So that's all of the example that I can give with the game engine creation that focus on no code programming and its output as mobile games. Now further into the discussion of how we can come up with great mobile games idea, because this is one that is also important. And as I mentioned earlier about the making up to dates into the mobile games market trends, where sometimes they will see a popular game, so it is a good thing that you do the research in social media. Even now the social media such as TikToks may serve you what is the current popular market trends for your gaming development. For example, when the social media was introduced with a new genre of werewolf kind of game, which was Among Us, a lot of people, a lot of game developers trying to make that as well, and it is a good thing to do if we are going with this kind of things to make an also bigger and huge idea in game development. We need also to, or we can also do scamper method. This is a method that can be used, so, and it's an observation of substitute, combine, adapt, modify, magnify, or giving it purpose, eliminate or minify, and readjust. So this method as well you can learn more and try to create a good mobile games using this kind of things. So this is what you can do. You can also do brainstorming. You can ask, discuss with others, hopefully someone who is experienced in that area, and try to come up with an idea after brainstorming. You can also brainstorm with your followers if you have any, but you also need to gather your own community. Make sure you promote that you are a game developer and try to discuss to them and do some brainstorming. And that's all what you have to do. You will also need to understand that there's also pros and contra, the advantages and disadvantages of this kind of methods in no code mobile game programming. The first one is the disadvantages, where the developers need to be familiar with the new code base, as same as what we discussed in previous meeting, and they also need to have an engine of developers where they can fix the bugs or the problems that arise when you are making your game development. It's also the advantages of not to be able to design it specifically for one games. It may be less efficient if we are going to do that, and almost the disadvantages comes with the cost of most of these game engines are not free, but we also have discussed it earlier because the game engines could have some potential arrangement that you can approve to use, such as the Unity or Unreal engines, where it gives you some example of using the engines and pay them after you made a lot of popular games. The advantages, of course, this kind of engine will able to give you a cross-platform ability, so you will only need to make one to produce and promote it into another operating system. It also have the coding things be finished for you, even though that if in the future you have to understand and also edit it in the programming way of codes writing. And also it has the pretty flexible of compatibility and function that it doesn't really require a supercomputer in order to develop games. In the end, we need to we need to be sure that even though that this kind of creating games fundamentals is just like developing any other apps, we as a developer need to look for plans, idea, to create, publish, and even to promote our games that we finish with our passion in it. We also need to remember that after doing this, we need to learn about the code of the game engines that we pick and focus more on increasing the capability and experience to become better and better. And that's all that I can say in today's meeting. Hopefully you can also learn more about this, and you can also getting more references. You can read again from the Python programming beginners book, or you can also read the paper that I give in the references behind me. Thank you for your attention. Hopefully we can meet again next meeting or last meeting, and have a nice day. Bye bye.